Hi, my name is Joanne and I'm with Discovery Hall Programs at the Dauphin Island Sea Lab, and today we're going to talk about living shorelines. So living shorelines are a restoration tool and kind of a strategy for preventing or managing coastal erosion. And actually we have a living shoreline example right behind us. So these concrete structures sticking up out of the water are called wave attenuation devices, or WADs. We're here right next to the ferry dock, actually. So this is the ferry that runs across the mouth of Mobile Bay. And when they come and go, and other boats that come and go from this launch, they create a lot of wake, a lot of energy. And we have this beautiful marsh off to our left here, and that's what they were trying to protect with these attenuation devices. So living shorelines are a combination of things. One is the in the water component, which we often refer to as a breakwater or reef of some kind. And so these concrete structures provide that reef structure. That you can see there are oysters growing on these reefs, and you can see a little bit where they're sticking up out of the water. There are triangles cut into these pyramid structures. Those are to attenuate or slow down, break up the wave energy as it's coming onto the shore. So preventing erosion of our marsh. So ordinarily the ferry comes and goes, that energy is going to eat away at that sediment and at those plants. And so the WADs, or wave attenuation devices, are going to slow that energy down and protect the shoreline behind it. So this living shoreline was actually put in 2005 with some of our partners, Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant. And it was really kind of a test to see if this kind of approach would be successful. And it really has been. Again, it's been here since 2005, and the marsh is very much intact. So they did do a planting of marsh grasses when they put in these structures, and it's all held very well. So the plus to a living shoreline, you're putting in this breakwater artificial reef structure in the hopes of maintaining that living coastline. So the part that's living are the plants, but then also the animals that are able to come and go because you're maintaining water flow. So now the opposite approach to this is a hard structure, something like a bulkhead or a seawall. People want to protect their property from erosion. And so a common approach, especially here around Mobile Bay, is to put in hard bulkheads. And that is going to protect property for some time, but eventually those bulkheads, they do fail. And so the idea is that with this living or more natural situation, it's going to grow and even grow hopefully to keep up with sea level rise and the disturbance that's happening in the area. So unfortunately around Mobile Bay, somewhere between 30 to 40% of our bay is hardened, we would say. So property protected by bulkheads. And in some places, there's really not an alternative. If you're talking, commercial property up in the northern part of the bay at the docks, for instance, they can't have a salt marsh up there and do their business. They have to have a hardened shoreline. But in other places, even these properties right back here, some of the properties on the north side of Dauphin Island, where it is low energy, kind of a calmer situation, a living shoreline is perfectly appropriate and enough to protect the shoreline. One of the many benefits of maintaining a natural or more natural living shoreline are all of the animals that are attracted. So we can actually see right out on this living shoreline here, there's a man in a kayak fishing. He may be catching speckled trout or something like that on these reefs. Fish are naturally attracted to these three-dimensional structures. I've seen lots and lots of blue crabs out here, certainly stone crabs, mud crabs, hermit crabs, and then in the marsh you can just see tons and tons at certain times of the fiddler crabs. So this is definitely attractive to our native wildlife and maintains the appropriate water flow for our coastal marshes.
Are these triangle bulkheads, are not bulkheads, but these triangle living shoreline, is this the only type you can find?
That's a great question. No, we actually have quite a few different approaches to living shorelines. And what's great is there are organizations around Mobile that are working really hard to test these different designs out. So they work with different agencies, even folks at the Sea Lab, to come in and kind of test how well different designs do. So what I'm holding here is a reef ball. So if you've spent any time around Mobile Bay, on the causeway coming down to Dauphin Island, there are some of these in the water. Of course, this is a small scale model, but you know, they're about 3 feet, 2 feet, I can't remember, in the water, and out at Coffee Island as well. So the Nature Conservancy in 2010 came in and did a big living shoreline restoration, and the Sea Lab was a part of the science of that, the monitoring of that, to see how well they did. So they used reef balls, they used bags of oyster shell. So oftentimes, and like what you can see on the wads here, it's oysters that provide our natural reef structure. All they need is something hard to attach to. And so these concrete pyramids here provided a great substrate or a great surface for those oysters to attach to. The bagged shell that we have in places around Mobile Bay, as well as the reef blocks. Another one that has been really popular are oyster castles, and those are basically kind of a cinder block, a concrete block system. So they're going to slow the waves as they come ashore, but also provide that surface for oysters like this guy to grow. So they're going to grow basically on anything hard, but they certainly prefer oysters to grow. But there are lots of things that will grow and encrust onto these artificial reefs. You can see this cockle clam here covered in worm tubes and bryozoan. There were sponges that were boring into this. So we do have a lot of encrusting animals or organisms that are going to help colonize or attach to these reef systems to get that, you know, going, and then other larger animals attracted to them. So yeah, there have been several different approaches tested around Mobile Bay.
Can you get a living shoreline on your own backyard if you live on the water?
Yeah, I think that's one of the really great things that has come out of this living shoreline movement is community. So Monlouis Island, the community there along one part of the shoreline kind of got together with the help of Mobile Bay NEP and Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant to come up with a plan and try to find a way to implement these living shorelines along, you know, basically their backyard. They had bulkheads that were failing, they were losing property, they needed an alternative, and so those organizations helped them to get the permitting. So there is a permitting process, much like you would go through with a bulkhead, but it is done on people's property. And then the other community part of that, I think that's so great, are folks like the Nature Conservancy that have put in these living shorelines a lot through volunteer effort, and so they've had people come in and volunteer their time to put in these. So there's a real ownership, you know, and a connection there to these living shorelines.
And so what creatures, so we say that oysters like these, what else likes to habitat on these?
So you'll often find blue crabs, like I said, other crabs, but then finfish. So you could find speckled trout or sheep's head, and then certainly birds. You'll often find herons and egrets kind of lurking around living shorelines like this to see what they can feast on. So definitely great habitat, but there's hundreds of organisms that actually associate with natural oyster reefs, and we found that they also can be found on these artificial reefs as well.
I think it's kind of interesting. You can kind of see, Joanne, if you want to explain it, you can kind of see the difference in the water here and the stillness of it there.
Yes, so you can actually see there's some boats coming in, and so you can see the waves coming in, and you know, all of this was tested in big wave pools, right? University of South Alabama, they have coastal engineers and they're testing these designs. And exactly what you can see here, the waves are coming in, they're getting broken up by these attenuation devices. And yes, the water is calmer towards the shore. That allows sediment to naturally build up and to protect these salt marshes. So our salt marshes are vital. You know, if you like seafood, crabs, fish, shrimp, this is our nursery habitat. And so without these marshes, we wouldn't have any of those things in our waters. So you know, we call them ecosystem services, things that these provide great buffers for storms. So keeping these marshes intact is critical. And it doesn't matter if your concern is energy from boat wake, you know, natural erosion or sea level rise. Marshes, you know, it's the hope that cases like this, they're going to keep up with that change in sea level over time and grow over time.
So we have a question. Can they become debris and cause damage in storms? Or are anchored in place?
Right. So one of the big things about living shorelines is trying to use more natural materials. So things like oyster shell, you know, things like concrete that aren't going to entangle or trap animals. These are very heavy. They're very large structures. When you look at these in an aerial view, you can see that they have probably shifted a little bit over time. But the engineers and the scientists certainly do take that into concern. I know that the reefs that were installed north of Dauphin Island, there was like a grid laid down to try to help hold them in place. They're made of very heavy materials. And so that is certainly a concern.
Poppy, who's 5, is curious to know if there are any alligators around that live in this area.
So this is brackish water, so still a good bit of salt in it, and the alligators really can't tolerate salty water for very long. So I personally have never seen an alligator here. We do have a little bit of fresh water, the freshwater pond on Dauphin Island, and the alligators pretty much stick to that fresh water.
And so,
good question though.
We see these structures above water, but how else can these structures be used in deeper water?
Yeah, so this is actually a larger version of this would be a common design for an artificial reef, like you would go and catch red snapper on. So you may be familiar with that pyramid structure. Even reef balls like this one are used to grow coral reefs in other places. In some places, instead of a grassy shoreline, it would be mangroves. So living shorelines are actually appropriate in a lot of different areas, whether it's marsh or mangrove, and whether it's in shallow water or deep water. A lot of these structures are used for different purposes.
Well, Joanne, thank you so much for letting people chat about living shorelines this morning.
Definitely. And there are lots of resources if you want to learn more. NOAA has a lot of great information about living shorelines, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. If you're here locally around Mobile Bay, like I said, Mississippi, Alabama Sea Grant, and Mobile Bay NEP, and of course the Dauphin Island Sea Lab.
Well, thank you guys, and we'll see y'all on Wednesday.